Hey there, welcome to our mini class today on iridology and pigments in the iris. The purpose in teaching these mini classes is to help holistic health professionals see the value of using constitutional iridology in their client work. Now, if that is you, stay tuned to the end to learn more about how to connect with me to learn more. And remember to like, share, and comment and subscribe on this video when it's up for the replay. Thank you for being with me today. We are just going to turn off the screen share for a minute. Hi there. Hi. Wish I could see all your faces. That would be so fun, but I can't. And I've just blocked my notes. There we go. Okay, so brief introduction of myself. My name is Judith Cobb. I am a level 3 certified IPA iridology instructor, as well as a master herbalist and a natural nutrition clinical practitioner. I've been a wellness coach since 1981. And a holistic wellness instructor since 1985. You can do the math. For me, that's getting into higher math, and that gets hard. So I specialize in teaching health professionals who already have anatomy and physiology under their belt, the art and science of iridology. So I need to ask the question and get you thinking about this. Who needs to learn iridology? Who should really have, and should is, I know, a guilt-laden word, but I don't mean it that way. Let me rephrase that. Who would benefit from having iridology as a skill for the work that they do? If you have any ideas, drop those in the chat box, because this is a really important point. A lot of people don't understand the value of iridology. Sharon says everyone. Okay, can we break that down a little bit? Because I assure you, my next door neighbor who's retired is somebody, but he doesn't need to learn iridology, right? Not at a clinical level. Who would you say as practitioners, as health professionals, should know iridology? Health coaches, yeah. Any kind of a health coach, yeah. Anybody else? Who do you think? You can throw out more than one answer. I look at this and I think, a registered nurse could use this. I mean, they are up close and personal with the patients. Couldn't they benefit from this? I have naturopaths using this, herbalists, nutrition coaches. I've got a registered dental hygienist using this. Now, she can't, look in her patient's eyes. She does mostly pediatrics. So she can't look in their eyes and say, you've got these problems. But she can look in their eyes, and then she can translate that into something that would relate to dental hygiene and teach the client and the patient about your body needs you to go in this direction if we want to keep your teeth in good condition, right? So massage therapists, right? Acupuncturists, everyone who is a health coach could benefit from using iridology and from learning this skill. So as we do this, I want you to think about that. And I want to know what are your credentials? I don't have to list your credentials, but what is it you do that has made you interested in learning iridology? What is it you do? What is your background? Drop that in the chat box. The more I know about you, the better I can tailor this presentation to meet your needs. And that's important. You're going to spend an hour with me. I want this to be an hour well spent, not an hour of ho-hum, right? So let's, while you're typing that in, I'm going to grab our screen again and go to where we need to go. I'm going to make sure I can see that chat box. There we go. And I kind of lost everything there. Everything disappeared on me. Okay, we got this. All right. So again, the more you play with me in the chat box, the more you're going to get out of me. If I feel like everyone's sleeping, we'll just make it a short evening. All right. So what have you learned about iridology? What do you know about iridology already? Give it to me in the chat box. Give me 2 or 3 sentences if you want. I want to know what you know about iridology. That'll let me know how deep or how shallow I need to keep our presentation tonight. So while you're doing that, I live in, our agricultural growing zones are different in Canada than they are in the States. I live in zone 3, which means that we consider our first frost free, pretty much guaranteed frost free date to be June 1st. We have a very short growing season, but really long days. And so I was out there planting my potatoes today. I got my potatoes and my garlic is up and looking beautiful. My asparagus from last year is looking a little sad still. It's up, but it's kind of scrawny. And so, but we're starting to see signs of spring. My apple trees have leafed out. We've got the plum tree. It has starting to burst its buds. My haskaps and my sea buckthorns are all starting to burst the buds. And the haskaps are blooming. So excited. The cherries, saskatoons, and currants are all starting to break their buds open. So it's pretty excited. There we go. So Sharon says, I'm on my own healing journey. I'm looking for my way to contribute to other people's healing journeys. Brilliant, Sharon. That is amazing. Martha says, helpful to see a glimpse of genetics. Ooh, I like that. I like that. And like to help people choose supplements and stay healthy. So good. Sharon says, I only started on my, I think you mean on my own learning iridology, or started on my iridology learning. Brilliant. I'm glad you're at the beginning because that means I can give you the right information. What do you know about pigments specifically? That's what we're talking about today. Do you know anything about pigments? Let me know so I can decide how deep to take you tonight. So while you're typing that in, I live about 10 minutes from what we call a provincial park. And that doesn't mean it's an old-fashioned park like provincial things in England kind of thing. It just means that it's a park that has been designated by the province. And so I can literally run to that park in 10 minutes. When I go down there, it's amazing. The Canada geese are just all over the place down there. Deer, bobcats. Sometimes we see coyotes. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun to run down there. Sharon says, don't know anything. Martha says pigments can be related to organ function. Excellent. So we're going to start at a beginner level and then we're going to build up to a little bit of what Martha knows. This is so good. So good. So iridology is an assessment tool with its roots in ancient cultures like Egypt, China, Greece, and India. Much like the pulse assessment from Ayurvedic and from traditional Chinese medicine, and tongue assessment and facial assessment from TCM, and fingernail assessment. So we've got so many assessment tools. Iridology is another assessment tool, and it dovetails beautifully with all of these other assessment tools. Unlike those assessment techniques, the iris assessment part of iridology does not focus on what's going on now, but instead teaches us about inherent predispositions. So where tongue analysis is going to tell you where the problem is now, where facial diagnosis is going to tell you a bit about where the problem is now, but also what's been long-standing. And pulse and fingernails are going to tell you things that are a little more current. When we're doing iridology, we are looking at genetic tendencies, inherent tendencies. So think of this as a way of assessing epigenetics in general, where the strength, we're looking for where the strengths and weaknesses are inherently, right? When we couple what we see in the eyes with the client's symptoms, we gain a deeper understanding of why he or she has the symptoms. And that's really important because one symptom can mean 15 different things. Well, maybe not 15, but it can be attached to a lot of possible root causes. And so we need to understand what the root causes are. So when we layer up the information of what the client wants help with, so what the symptoms are, what we see in their eyes, the questions we ask, and the answers they give us, it helps us understand what we need to be doing, what we need to be recommending for them. So consider these inherent tendencies based on other training we have, be it nutrition or herbology, aromatherapy, to make, or considering these inherent tendencies, we can use our other skills like nutrition, herbology, aromatherapy to make the recommendations that will get the best results for the client. So what I'm going to share to you today is share with you today. Boy, I need to plug my verbal part of my brain in a little bit tighter tonight. What I'm going to share with you now is a part of one of the lessons from the 50-hour course I teach called Dynamic Iridology Assessment System for Health Professionals. Each pigment color means something different. Sometimes slightly different, but sometimes very different. Remember, every computer monitor, tablet, and phone displays color differently. You'd think with all the technology we have, we'd be able to build screens that show color accurately, wouldn't you? But we have not got that possibility just yet. So we've got yellow and orange. So we've got some orange down here. We've got red, little tiny bit of red right in here. And rust. And brown. And black. So I want to know, have you looked at your eyes? Do you know what colors of pigments you have? What colors of pigments do you have in your eyes? So excited, my raspberries are leafing out as well. So good. Okay, so Martha has red and orange. Sharon, have you looked at your eyes? Do you know what colors of pigments? I tried, but I don't have a magnifying glass, so I can't get close enough. There you go. Yeah, so that can be a little bit challenging. It sure can. So we're only going to touch on 2 of the colors today because, again, we're taking an excerpt from a 2.5-hour lesson. You ready? You ready for this? Pigment refers to any color that is different from the base color of the iris. An iris can have no pigments at all or many pigments. And it can have many pigments that are different colors, or they might all be the same color. Really important to remember that the number of pigments is not a key indicator. So when we have an eye that has lots of pigments like the one you're looking at now, we are not necessarily going to assess each and every pigment that's there, especially in a clinical setting. And I say that because when we have many pigments, they are not each individually necessarily important, but they are collectively important. And so with this, we would be looking at this eye, and instead of counting how many dark brown pigments and how many rust colored pigments do we have and how much of the eye is covered with yellow, we would simply note that we've got the brown pigments. We're going to talk a little bit about what brown pigments mean today. We've got dark brown pigments, which are really just a category of brown pigments, and we've got yellow. And so we just want to look first at the overall colors of the pigments to understand how they want to affect the body overall. Most of the time, a person will have one color family of pigment, for example, brown toned pigments, or a person might be like this one and have many pigment colors, like what we're seeing here. So pigments help us to understand if one organ wants to influence another organ. So anytime you see a pigment, it does say there's an organ that wants to influence other organs. For example, if the liver is inherently the one that wants to be the troublemaker, let me do that again. For example, if the liver inherently wants to mess with the pancreas, or if the kidneys are genetically programmed to create issues with the lymphatic system, we're going to see that with the pigments. This is why we need to understand organs and their functions and their interactions with each other. This is why it's so important to have that college level anatomy and physiology class under your belt before you start learning iridology. When we have that foundational understanding of anatomy and physiology and the understanding of iridology and pigments, we can get to the roots of problems much more quickly. And then we can create more on-target programs for our clients. The idea that pigments, and I want to know if any of you have heard this, that pigments are an indication that the person's had toxic exposures and has toxins they need to clean out. Has anybody heard that? Let me know in the chat box, just yes or no, if you've heard that. That pigments mean this person is toxic and they need to get cleaned out. Oh, Sharon, I'm so glad you haven't heard the lies. So glad, so glad. So with this, the idea that pigments are the result of toxic exposure came from an early researcher, Pastor Nils Liljeqvist in Sweden in the late 1800s. His theory was published without adequate study, and people are still saying that it's accurate when it's not. It has been disproved. It's really important to remember pigments are not the result of toxic exposure. They are an indication of epigenetic potential. They show us where the body could run into trouble if care is not taken. Pigments cannot be cleansed out, fasted out, or supplemented out. We're never going to make the eye that you're looking at be an even blue-gray color. It's always going to have pigments, and it will likely gain more pigments as this person goes through life. Pigments may and often do surface over time. Again, much like under the influence of genetics, it's much like my hair has not always had gray in it. The gray surfaced over time as a result of genetics. Pigments in the irides often show up over time. We'll look at a specific example of this in a few minutes. There are other ways we are able to assess the body, where the trouble spots are in the body right now. So, right when we're looking at the sclera, for instance, and I'm developing a course on sclerology, probably be ready in about a year. This tells us where the hot spots are now. The iris tells us what's been inherited and what is becoming active through epigenetics. And the sclera tells us where things are in trouble now, where things are really active right now. So we need to avoid looking at the iris as if it's a crystal ball. And yes, when we look at a dark brown eye, we would call this a hematogenic iris. If we look closely, if you're on a big enough screen, you'll see right here, there is a brown pigment. So yes, we can see pigments, particularly brown pigments, in a brown iris. A lot of people think brown eyes are harder to read, harder to assess when you know what you're looking for. They're not hard at all. Pigment development. Now, this is another interesting fact. When we examine the idea of pigment showing up over time, we need to remember to consider the technology involved in taking both photos. Different cameras, different lighting, it's all going to affect the output. It's going to affect what we see. So when we see these are the same person. These are the same person. Let's match some things up. We've got this sitting right here. So what is that, about 15, 20, about 23 minutes? We've got that little marking sitting on the collarette. We've got this lacuna sitting inside the collarette at about 50, 52 minutes. We've got it right here. We've got this large marking coming here. The difference between these two is these are both handheld cameras, which means they are not completely level one to another. That's why it looks like the markings have shifted a bit. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, give me makes sense in the comments box. Perfect, Sharon. Excellent. Okay, so again, the color differences here are not due to fasting or cleansing or taking some magic potion. They're due to different cameras. You know, they're different cameras. The light artifacts are different. This was an an incandescent flash. This was an LED flash. So very different color values to those lights. That's going to affect the output. So this is really important. Another issue with tech is there's no two computer screens that display color exactly the same. What looks like rust on one screen will look like brown on another and dirty orange on another. While we often work off photos, it's so important to be able to at least be able to take a look at the eyes face to face to get a good feeling for what the colors are. You don't usually see people who do iris analysis on Facebook acknowledging the inaccuracy of tech. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. These images, again, are the same person taken 20 years apart. We've identified and matched up different things. Can you see the one thing that is vastly different from one photo to the other? If you can, let me know what you're seeing. The pupil is a different size. Yeah, Martha. That's going to have a lot to do with how bright the light is. An LED light is much brighter than an incandescent light. That's a good thing to notice. At about 35 minutes, Sharon, I think you might be referring to the pigment. Sitting just outside the collarette. This is the collarette, just outside the collarette, this 35 minutes. Yes, sharp eyes, good job, good job. So each pigment color teaches us about an organ that epigenetically wants to be out of balance. Whether it is out of balance now or not depends largely on how the person is taking care of his or her body. So now you've got a foundation on the topic of pigments in iridology. We're going to talk about 2 of the 6 primary pigments. Remember, a pigment tells us 2 different things. The color of the pigment tells us which organ wants to be a troublemaker. The placement of the pigment tells us which organ will be the recipient of the trouble. So which organ is going to be poked, if you will. Brown, no matter where it is in the eye, always tells us that the liver wants to be the troublemaker. So when we think of the liver, how many different jobs does the liver do for the body? Any wild guesses? Sharon, you've been listening. I love that. She says, I think you said 500. Yes. Yeah. We've identified at least 500 different things it does. Everything from the ones people like to talk about, the detoxification processes, which there's actually 2 different key processes involved there, but all the way down to helping the pancreas to manage carbohydrates, to making your lipids, to helping with hormone balancing. It does so many things. So it is a truth that the liver can have an impact on any and every other organ and tissue in the body. Whether the liver is causing problems or not can only be ascertained by asking symptoms and reviewing lab tests. I always ask my clients to bring in their most recent labs from their doctors, right? Because there's often little hidden gems in those labs that the doctors have maybe paid attention to or maybe overlooked. And I like to be able to see it just to see what I think. So this is, again, where having a solid understanding of anatomy and physiology comes in. So what are some of the other things the liver does? We've already mentioned a couple of phases of detoxification. We've mentioned creating lipids and balancing, working with the pancreas to balance carb processing. We've also talked about how the liver impacts hormone balance. Can you think of anything else the liver does? It's only about 4 or 5 things out of 500. It makes bile. Yes, Martha, it does make bile. A very important job as well. Good job. Anything else? What else can the liver do? And leave that one with you. So in truth, if the liver isn't working well, it can affect anything it wants to. Sharon says, doesn't it impact our immune system? Yes, it absolutely does. And it even has its own specialized built-in immune system. So it's got on 2 levels, it's involved with our immune functions. Absolutely, nicely done. So we need to be able to correlate symptoms with the possible root of the problem in order to make sound recommendations, right? We've got to be able to start piecing things together. So I really appreciate what my constitutional iridology teacher, Bill Caradonna, taught me over 30 years ago. He said the irides don't give us answers. They teach us what questions to ask. So here we see a large brown, very dark brown pigment sitting in the kidney reaction field. Let's break this down. What are some symptoms of the liver not being happy? What might you see if the liver, we're just talking about liver first, if the liver's not happy, what are some symptoms of a liver being cranky? Headaches, yeah. Traditional Chinese medicine says headaches and especially migraines come from the liver. Mm-hmm. Any other symptoms of a liver being cranky? Eyes. What about the eyes, Martha? What about the eyes? I can think of a couple of different ways the eyes are affected by the liver. I want to know which one you're thinking of specifically. Fatigue, yeah, blurry vision. Okay, good. Now we're cooking with gas. This is so good. Yes, the fatigue is an important one as well. All right. So one of the functions of the liver is that when it does the phase 1 detox and then moves into phase 2 detox, phase 2 is taking everything that's been broken down by the liver and turning it into water solubles so the kidneys can remove them. Okay. So the liver has to do its job in order for the kidneys to do their job. So what are some key symptoms of the kidneys not being happy? If the kidneys aren't doing their job, what might we see? What might we see if the kidneys are not? Joint problems. Yes, yes, that's a very TCM perspective on the kidneys. Again, nicely done, nicely done. Joint problems, because the kidneys regulate the acid levels in the blood. And if we're too acidic, then it can lead to inflammation and in the joints particularly, but inflammation anywhere. Any other ideas of what unhappy kidneys could create for symptoms? Oops, I did not mean to do that. This client, I meant to do this over here. This client may not have any symptoms or any issues. We look at the eyes and go, but there's that big pigment sitting in the kidney zone. There must be a symptom. Not necessarily. This is what the body wants to do when it's out of balance. Maybe this client has already figured that out, that consuming alcohol, eating a highly processed food diet, they term that now, ultra processed food, a UPF diet. Maybe this client has figured out that those things don't work well for her, and that when she takes time to drink some lemon water first thing in the morning, some fresh squeezed lemon water, and when she drinks enough good filtered water every day and gets some parsley in her salad every night, everything feels better. And so she may be doing all the right things to help her body do its jobs properly and thereby be averting symptoms and imbalances. But the eyes say if she didn't do that, she would have problems. Now, think of this as she needs to think of this pigment as a warning to her that she needs to mind her manners. Behave yourself, young lady. Right? If you want to be healthy, you take care of yourself. If she's having symptoms, we now understand the basics of the physiology. We know how the liver and the kidneys should work together and how they are not. And from there, we can dive deeper into nutrition and supplements and lifestyle, thought patterns and belief patterns. Is this making sense? That what we see in the eyes is not a guarantee of problems. It's the blueprint of how her body wants to operate, right? So what you're experiencing tonight is exactly how I teach iridology. I want my students drawing on what they already know to integrate it with iridology. When we do that, iridology comes to life and it becomes useful. If I simply sat you down and said, brown pigments mean liver problems or a predisposition to liver problems, and you had to figure out, but it's a brown pigment in a kidney reaction field, what does that mean? It's a lot more work because you haven't been trained about how to think through connecting all the dots, right? So important. Iridology should not be taught like a paint by numbers class. Sometimes the pigment we see will be more of a wash. Rather than a blotch or a freckle, it'll be more like a wash. It'll be kind of poured over a part of the eye. But the same process applies. Consider the color of the pigment and the placement of the pigment. And then what influence could the troublemaking organ inflict on the recipient? Okay, so we've got this very light, rusty kind of brown, which is liver. This is sitting in the stomach and intestinal zone primarily. So how can the liver mess with digestion? How can it mess with the stomach processes? We always want to start by asking our client, what do you want help with? And we want to know what their symptoms are. We need to know if they've had surgeries. Are they on medications? What is their daily diet like? We need information. The eyes are not a crystal ball. They give us information, but we can understand that information much better if we understand what the other variables are. So again, if you know your A and P well, this should be giving you a framework. Iridology should give you a framework that will help you know where to focus as you assess the irides. We never assess an iris without some background information. Iridology, again, is not a crystal ball. It's an assessment tool. And it's so important for us to pay attention to that. So when we see all of this brown in the stomach and intestinal zones, we know that in order to help the digestion work better, we're going to have to support the liver first. We're going to have to support the liver first because we need the liver to be processing things. Actually, we're going to have to support both together. We're going to have to support stomach, primarily stomach and liver together, because we need the person to be eating good foods and breaking them down properly. That would be the stomach side of the equation. And then we need to support the liver so it can use the components that the stomach has prepared appropriately. So this would be a case where we're supporting both of those areas to create the goal that we're looking for. Does that make sense? Yeah, totally. Fantastic. Fantastic. Yellow. Yellow. Yellow is an indication of the kidneys genetically wanting to be the troublemakers here. So consider this to be an overarching risk of kidney insufficiency or inefficiency. I did not say kidney disease because that is not what it means. It just means that somewhere along the way, the kidneys want to go, yeah, I can do the job, make me, right? So I think of this as being like a teenager, when my kids were teens and they'd go, yeah, I can do the job. And then they would never say it because they knew it would have been instant death, right? But you could hear them saying in their brains, make me, right? And there was always a way to entice them to be cooperative. So when we see yellow in an eye, we need to remember that yellow is going to be hard to see on a dark brown eye, right? It's probably not going to show up much. The brown is going to kind of overshadow everything. So the yellow is always more visible in a blue eye. We would call this blue eye a lymphatic eye. So whenever yellow is visible in the iris, either in pockets, so in little patches, or making the whole iris appear greenish because blue plus yellow makes green, or maybe it is golden highlights in the eye, then we know that there is the personal and family history tendency of some kind of kidney issues. And it might be very minor or it might be significant. So this is where we need more information. We need to see some urinalysis. We need to see some labs on their filtration rates. We need to see what is their uric acid in their blood doing, right? We want to see some of these results if we can. And we're going to watch for symptoms. It's like Martha said earlier, one of the symptoms is joint issues, right? Other symptoms of kidneys would be blood pressure issues, fluid retention, itchy skin. Itchy skin can be a lot of things. It can also be liver, right? And so when we see this yellow, we want to know what the personal and family history is. Again, when we see the yellow, the same process applies. The number of pigments is irrelevant. The fact that there are pigments is relevant. The positioning of the pigments becomes highly relevant when we understand the symptoms. But until then, we are not going to load our client down with, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, uh-oh, 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 oh no, no, we don't want to see that one. Right? We're not going to give them that long list of everything because most of these will never become symptomatic. Right? So that was the browns. Yellows in this eye, pretty much more of a wash over the entire eye. And so that says kidneys want to affect the entire body, which they darn well can, right? Because if your acid is out of balance and you're too acidic, that is going to affect absolutely everything in the body. So again, we always start by asking the client about what they want help with and what their symptoms are. You know, this is something that makes holistic practitioners very different from so many other practitioners out there. And I'm not going to diss doctors. We need doctors. Like when I broke my arm twice in 10 weeks, 5 years ago, I was glad we had a hospital nearby. I was grateful for skilled surgeons who could repair my arm, put it back together for me and make it very functional, right? We need doctors. Doctors where I live don't have the time. They don't take the time to listen. But we as holistic health professionals do. I had a client in for the first time today. We were together for about an hour and 15 minutes. I assure you, the longest time she's ever had with a doctor about the concern that she brought in today would have been 10 minutes if the doctor wasn't overly busy. Right, so I wanted details of when did it start? How often does this happen? What have you found that makes your symptoms better? Have you seen any other symptoms that come up at the same time? What is your feeling about what's going on? People are intuitive. They often know what's out of balance. And so we take the time. And that means we also ask questions. When we look at their eyes, we want to tie what we see in with their symptoms so that we can ask questions that are appropriate, not shotgun pattern 300-page questionnaire kind of questions, specific questions. So we never assess an iris without the background information. So when the kidneys are not doing their job properly, I'm listening for indications of inflammation. That would be an acid problem. Arthritis, joint problems, those would be acid problems. Fluid retention, blood pressure, itchy skin, fatigue. Just like the liver, when the kidneys are not working well, fatigue sets in, right? When oat straw yellow is present, consider supporting the kidneys to help keep acid levels under control on an ongoing basis. So if we've got the yellow in the eyes and we've got some symptoms, let's say we've got any symptoms of arthritis, of acids, we'll just go any symptoms of acids, what dietary recommendations would you make? What would be one thing you would have them change? And there's not just one right answer. I expect to see several different answers here. what would be one recommendation, assuming they're on a standard North American diet? What would be one thing that they probably are doing that they should not keep doing as far as their food intake goes? I need you to draw on whatever you know about inflammatory processes, whatever you know about diet or nutrition, processed foods. Yeah, now that could be a big one. If this is a junk food junkie, we probably can't tell them to do a clean sweep. So, Sharon, I want you to narrow that down. What would be one specific food that you would want them to take out? Martha says they're probably eating the wrong fats like seed oils. So, Martha, that's a fairly easy swap out, isn't it? To say, let's replace your grapeseed oil, your canola oil, those things with extra virgin cold pressed olive oil, with avocado oil, with better oils, with coconut oil, MCT coconut oil. Sharon says alcohol. Yes, take the alcohol out. It stresses every system, doesn't it? Absolutely. Jen says drink water separate from food so food can break down better. Yes. Sharon says avoid deep fried foods. Yes. Yes. Now you're lasering in. That's what we want to see. We want to simplify things here, right? Two key things that I will always pick on. Well, no, one that I will always pick on and one that I will pick on if needed. First one is get them to cut out coffee. Coffee will acidify the body faster than anything, right? If I can get them to cut out coffee and then replace that with filtered water, the kidneys are already saying thank you, right? If we can, I like Sharon's suggestion here too. If you can avoid the deep fried foods and get them to eat foods that are not so messed up, that would be great. And to avoid alcohol, again, you're probably going to have to give them a substitute, right, Sharon? Because you take something away, what do? You create a vacuum. And if we don't fill that gap, the alcohol will come back in. So this might be where we say, maybe you could go to drinking juice that is diluted by 75%. So it's 1 part juice to 3 parts water. If they feel like they need some flavor in what they're drinking. Good suggestions. I love this. This is what we need to be doing when we do iridology, is think about very specific recommendations. Because if we tell them to alkalize their diet, that's their whole life. And to do that in one fell swoop is not going to work for most people, right? So easy dietary recommendations could include things like reducing the amount of red meat they eat and having more chicken and fish. So again, easy substitutions. We could suggest that they begin increasing their leafy greens. And I will be visual. I'll say, I want you to have this much salad every day. And then in the next appointment, how are you doing with that? Okay, great. Then let's have this much salad every day. And we gradually expand that salad. Drinking filtered water, adding celery and parsley into the diet can be beneficial, right? Now, if the client does not have any issues or any symptoms of issues, and she might be doing everything very well, that might be supporting everything beautifully, I will still make recommendations, right? Maybe she's come in for something that seems to be unrelated. Let's say she's come in for hot flashes. In my experience, if I support the kidneys, that's going to help the adrenals, that's going to help the hot flashes. So I can still come back to the kidneys, tie the kidneys in, and explain it to the client in a way that makes sense. So that when I say a little less red meat and no coffee, let's replace the coffee with a dandelion root tea, and let's replace the red meat with a little more chicken, a little more fish. Right? We've got some forward motion here. Is this all making sense? Now, in her particular case, we've got brown for liver and we've got yellow for kidneys. We are going to have to work with the liver and the kidneys together for whatever symptoms she's got. in her case, doing one without the other is not going to take us where we need to go. So we have to create a protocol that is doable, that hits the high points first, but is not overwhelming. So again, it might be take out the coffee and reduce the red meat, replace it with chicken or fish. And that's our kidney side. Now to support the liver, we've taken out the coffee, so that's a great thing to do for the liver. Can we get you to have a glass of fresh squeezed lemon in water every day? Like a half a lemon squeezed into 8 ounces of water every day. And that'll be a part of her water intake, but it's also a great support for her liver. And get her to eat some celery every day. Pretty simple. Would that overwhelm you? If this was your eye and I said, can we cut out the coffee over the next month and replace it with dandelion root tea? You'll have to experiment. How about reducing the beef from 5 nights a week to 3 nights a week and replacing that with chicken or fish? Could we get you to squeeze a half of a lemon into 8 ounces of water and drink that first thing in the morning? And have a stick of celery, like a whole stick of celery, every day with supper. Is that doable? It's not scary, is it? When we keep our recommendations focused, we get better compliance. When we get better compliance, our clients get better results. When they get better results right out of the starting blocks, they become lifetime clients. And it allows us the opportunity and the privilege of working with them more frequently for longer periods of time to craft that diet, craft that lifestyle, craft any supplements we want to do with them over time, because we've got their trust and they're getting results. They know they're not wasting time. They know they're getting where they need to go. But we do it in a way that is very gentle. We all don't have a professional cook living with us. Most of us have other lives that we need to live, and we can't spend our whole day prepping food and meditating and all this stuff. We need to do changes that are very gentle and very doable, right? How is that going? Is this, and it isn't cost prohibitive? Sharon, yes. Yes. So important. Tell you one story here that's really, and I think it's a real, what's the word? It was a heartbreaker for me, except that I helped solve the problem. I had a client come into me once, and she was in her early 60s. She brought in a laundry basket full of supplements. I always have my clients bring in whatever they're using, and she brought in literally a laundry basket full. And I looked at it and I said, so what are you taking from this? She said, I take something from every bottle. There was probably, honestly, 50 or 60 bottles there. Now, the thing that really broke my heart is I knew who was coaching her. And I knew that every time they spoke, that person was not writing down for her. She didn't keep professional records. She was just giving verbal instructions because these two ladies were related. And never once did the person who was making recommendations say, how is that working and what are you taking? She said, oh, I think you should take this now, without ever telling the other woman to stop taking some of what she was taking. So this woman who became my client was taking everything that had ever been recommended to her. It was costing her, except that she was getting them at the wholesale price, it was costing her $1,500 a month. And we are talking 25 years ago. Right? More than I was paying for my mortgage payment, like a lot more, right? And so we looked at this, and she had so many duplicates, right? She had like 5 different things for the liver and 4 different things for digestion and 6 different things for the bowel. And so we lined them up, divided them into categories, and I put them in order of how I thought she should work through them. And we did that. I sent her with nothing new. I said, okay, we're going to start with the liver things, we're going to start here. You're going to use this bottle first, this many a day. When that runs out, you'll go to the next bottle, which is called blah, 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 and you'll use this many per day. And we also want to do something for digestion. So let's start with this one. And I taught her how to work through things. So we got her down from using like 50 bottles a day to using 5 bottles a day. When she came in a month later, she said, I asked her, how are you feeling? She said, I feel so good. She felt lousy taking so many supplements and couldn't figure out why. If she was taking all these good supplements, she was feeling absolutely horrible. I knew exactly why she was overdosing. And it wasn't in a way that her body could make sense with, right? So we simplified it. And when I asked her, how are you feeling? She said, absolutely fantastic. I said, that is so good. I am so glad to hear it. And she said, my husband wants me to thank you. And I said, oh, why? She said, because now I'm doing this and it's costing me maybe $150 a month. At $1,500 a month, I was spending all of our retirement income. And it was highly likely that we would have nothing left by the time we were 70. But now that we've reduced this to $150 a month, we're good. We're good for like decades. Right? So cost prohibitive. Yeah, keep it simple, keep it laser focused. That's one of the problems I have with the one size fits all programs that a lot of iridologists recommend is they're expensive. Yes, they're probably going to help the person, but there's a lot of waste in there, a lot that's not needed. Right? So we really practice in the dynamic iridology course how to create protocols that will build from one appointment to the next, on how to keep the protocols simple so that the clients are not overwhelmed, right? All right. So little sales pitch here. The next course start date is May 15th. So that's just next week. If you are a health pro, if you've got that college level anatomy and physiology already under your belt, and you're interested in learning iridology at a clinical level and getting the other 4 pigments under your belt, and you want to study with someone who is keeping up with the research, someone who has been practicing iridology for over 4 decades and has been a health coach for over 4 decades, then we should chat. Grab either the QR code or grab the URL. I can actually put that URL in the chat box. And this will give you, when you go to this page, it will give you a way that you can schedule a little 45-minute meet and greet with me to talk about the course and to see if it's a good fit for you. Now, again, only if you've got that college level anatomy and physiology. If you don't have that course already under your belt, reach out to me and I will send you a link to the course I recommend. And you can get that taken care of before we talk about you coming into dynamic iridology. When you understand anatomy and physiology before you learn iridology, we can go so much deeper, so much faster, right? All righty. Any questions for me? I loved the chat tonight. That was so good, so good. I love the interaction. Any questions before we wrap up? If you're typing something in, just raise your hand so I know to wait for you. Otherwise, we will call it an evening. So I hope to speak with you very soon, and do take good care, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye for now.